than that. You guys are amazing. Yeah, that was all honest country all day long or all night long. We'll go with that. How's everybody? Good. I'm going to just have a seat up here, even though I have short people problems, but even if I stand up, it doesn't really make a lot of difference. So, we'll just go with sitting down here. I'm going to move this mic, though, for you people. If you can't see a screen, you might want to turn yourself so you can position it, because we're actually going to we're going to read through some Old Testament passages tonight, and I want to make sure that you can follow along, because there's a lot of storytelling that's going on. So I know we're in the coffee house, but we're going to actually talk about lemonade tonight. Who likes lemonade? Anybody? It's kind of weird, isn't it? Yeah, sometimes I like it, sometimes I don't. It's kind of that bittersweet and sweet and sour, and we're going to be talking about this guy. His name is Joseph, and we've subtitled this series, When Life Gives You Lemons, You Say, you what? Okay, you've got that, you make lemons. Sometimes that gets on my nerves, that whole saying. But Joseph is a historical figure in the Old Testament. History tells us about his life, and the Bible tells us a lot about his life. And basically, when you look at his story, he has so many circumstances that you could actually call bitter, that God actually transforms and develops into something that you would call lemonade. That he takes those things, he redeems his story, and makes it into something amazing. So over the next few weeks, Abe will be here, Patrick will be talking about this. You'll hear different communicators talk about this life of Joseph together. I think it's really going to be great. Now, for me, that transformation process to what I'm going to call bittersweet, because the bitter is still in there, sometimes for me it takes the shape of a detour. I don't know how you feel about detours, but I'm guessing if you're like me, your life story isn't exactly how you would have written it when you were a kid. Is that true? With most everybody? Yeah. Well, it's certainly true for me. I think it's true for most people. There have probably been a lot of detours along the way. Maybe you might feel like you're on a detour right now that's involving transition in your life. I know for me, my detour started out when I was very, very young. My parents were divorced when I was little. That was certainly not a detour I was planning on. I think you always assume your parents will be married forever. And then as I grew up, I got to be 13 years old, and they decided that they would let me choose which parent I could live with. And so I chose to live with my dad. My dad was moving from California to Texas. That sent me on a really big detour. One I wasn't planning on, that was a personal, family, emotional detour, was then that my mom disowned me for deciding to go live with my dad. So there was, a familial detour. And then I grew up here in Houston, and then I thought I was going to go to Rice University. I ended up going to U of A. So we could all tell stories of the various detours that we've had in our lives. And, I think, I don't know about you, but when I see a detour sign right now, when you see a detour sign, does your back kind of get tight? Do you feel like that? It's kind of internally, I do the moan, or externally, because I know something's going to take a little bit longer. Something's going to go a little bit different than whatever my plan would, or whatever Waze was telling me and they hadn't figured out yet. So I think most of us didn't really sign up for the detour part of life. We kind of like it to be a straight line from A to Z. And sometimes those detours, they're our own doing, right? Sometimes we create our own. Sometimes there's someone else's doing, so they go on a detour, and then you're like on a detour too, and you're like, well, I didn't sign up for your detour, but it's putting me on a detour. Sometimes it's just life happens, and we get on a detour. But it'd be pretty ridiculous for us to come up on a detour sign and then to just sit there staring at it and not move through the detour. So we're going to see that in Joseph's life, and we're going to hopefully take it on a personal level for our detours as well. And the Bible actually, it's full of stories of all kinds of characters who experience lots and lots of detours in their lives. So I really think Joseph is a great picture of what that looks like. So we're going to open the story. We're going to actually read it together, and I love this part. And immediately be watching for some red flags that you see could turn into detours for Joseph. So you ready? Here we go. When Joseph was 17 years old, he often tended his father's name is Jacob, by the way, his father Jacob's flocks. He worked for his half-brothers, the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Zilpah, But Joseph reported to his father some bad things his brothers were doing. And Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children because Joseph had been born to him in his old age. So when we first meet Joseph, he's 17 years old. He's a teenager. He has 10 older brothers. That's crazy in and of itself. Unfortunately, his dad, Jacob, played favorites. He picked Joseph as his favorite son, and that set him up for a lot of bad things. That really didn't serve him very well. I'm sure you noted that his dad had 2 wives, so there's a little bit of, that's weird. And there's a lot of dysfunction going on there. And we really get our first picture of how he related to his siblings, because in verse 2 it says that he tattled on them. So we know that Joseph, he's a little bit of a tattletale here, and then it gets better. So one day, Jacob, that's the dad, had a special gift for Joseph, a beautiful robe, or the word could be coat there. But his brothers hated Joseph because their father loved him more than the rest of them, and they couldn't even say a kind word to him. So this is not going to go well, right? I mean, this is the famous, have you heard of it, the coat of many colors? Maybe you've been to that musical. But it really presented an even bigger problem because the firstborn was the one who was supposed to get the coat. And with the coat, you got the firstborn blessings and all of the things, the birthrights, all of the things that came with that. And since Joseph, he's number 11 in the lineup, you know that it's going to go downhill from there. So one night, Joseph had a dream, and when he told his brothers about it, they hated him more than ever. Listen to this dream, he said. We were out in the field tying up bundles of grain, and suddenly my bundles stood up, and all your bundles gathered all around and bowed low before mine. And his brothers responded, wow, so you think you're going to be our king, do you? Do you actually think you will reign over us? And they hated him all the more because of his dreams and the way he talked about them. Soon Joseph had another dream, and again he told his brothers about it. And he said, well, listen, I've had another dream. And this time the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed low before me. Wow. And this time he told the dream to his father as well as his brothers, but his father stepped in and scolded him. And he said, well, what kind of dream is this? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow to the ground before you? But while his brothers were jealous of Joseph, his father wondered what the dreams meant. So, this is not going well. The brothers are already jealous. They're already resentful because of the whole coat situation. And now he has this ginormous dream where in the future they're all going to bow down to him. And then he has a second dream and the whole world is going to bow down to him. Now, later in the story, and you'll find this out next week, Joseph, he's actually an Old Testament prophet. So an Old Testament prophet did what? He prophesied, and then he did a lot of that through dreams, and then he was able to interpret his dreams. But the problem here is that Joseph is using really bad judgment in who he tells his dreams to. It's really the wrong dream at the wrong time to the wrong people. His timing is just terrible. And on top of that, he's still running around, prancing around with his beautiful coat on. So this is getting worse by the minute. So Joseph, he really had some work to do before he could step into his destiny of where he was headed and that God had for him. So it says, go and see how your brothers and the flocks are getting along, the dad said, Jacob said. Then come back and bring me a report. So Jacob sent him on his way, and Joseph traveled to Shechem from their home in the valley of Hebron. When Joseph's brothers saw him coming, they recognized him in the distance because of the fancy coat he had on. And as he approached, they made plans. It's getting extreme now, y'all. They made plans to kill him. So here comes the sarcasm. Here comes the dreamer, they said. Come on, let's kill him, and we'll throw him in one of these cisterns. And we can tell our father, well, a wild animal is eating him. Then we'll see what becomes of all of his big dreams. But when Reuben heard of their scheme, he came to Joseph's rescue. No, let's not kill him, he said. Why do we have to do the blood thing? Let's just throw him in the empty cistern here in the wilderness. And then he'll die without us laying a hand on him. Now, I really don't know what the difference is here, but anyway. Now, Reuben was secretly planning to rescue Joseph and return him to his father. So he's that brother. But when Joseph arrived, his brothers ripped off the beautiful robe he was wearing. Then they grabbed him. Are you getting a visual of this? And they threw him in the cistern. Now, the cistern was empty. He had that working for him. There was no water in it. But then, just as they were sitting down to eat, they looked up and saw a caravan of camels in the distance coming toward them. And it was a group of Ishmaelite traders taking a load of gum and balm and, I don't know, aromatic resin, whatever that is, maybe a candle, from Gilead down to, make a note of this, because it's going to be important next week, to Egypt. So clearly the brothers, they haven't gotten over all of their resentment. They've stripped Joseph of his beautiful coat that he's been hiding behind, and now they've thrown him in a pit, and the plot thickens. Then Judah, all the brothers are chiming in here, by the way. Judah said to his brothers, you know, what are we going to gain by killing your brother? We'd have to cover up the crime. So instead of hurting him, let's sell him. That's nice. To those Ishmaelite traders. After all, he's our brother. We should sell him, our own flesh and blood. And his brothers agreed. So when the Ishmaelites, who were Midianite traders, came by, Joseph's brothers pulled him out of the cistern and sold him to them for 20 pieces of silver, and the traders took him to Egypt. Sometime later, Reuben returned to get Joseph out of the cistern, and when he discovered that Joseph was missing, he tore his clothes in grief, because remember, he was going to save him from all this. Then he went back to his brothers and lamented, the boy is gone, what am I going to do now? Then the brothers killed a young goat. This is quite the plot, isn't it? And they dipped the special robe in the blood, and they sent the beautiful robe to their father with this message. Look what we found. Doesn't this robe belong to your son, as in our brother? Their father recognized it immediately. Well, yes, he said, it's my son's robe. A wild animal must have eaten him. Joseph has clearly been torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his clothes, dressed himself in burlap, and he went into mourning. He mourned deeply for his son for a long time, and his whole family tried to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. I'm going to go to my grave mourning for my son, he would say, and then he would weep. Meanwhile, the Midianite traders arrived in Egypt, now he's been sold again, where they sold Joseph, make a note of this because this name will be familiar next week, to Potiphar, who was an officer of Pharaoh, who was the king of Egypt. Now Potiphar just happened to be the captain of the palace guard. So Joseph's still alive, but his situation, it's clearly gone from bad to worse. But I want you to know that when Joseph gets to Egypt, he's not sold to just anyone, is he? He just so happens to be sold to Potiphar, who just so happens to be the captain of the palace guard under the king. So the thing is, you guys, God is already at work. He's already at work with Joseph in these amazing plans that he has for him. And he's getting ready to use all the things, being put in a pit, dumped in a pit, sold as a slave, being brought to Egypt to work as a slave for a higher purpose and really for a greater story. And he's going to use this great big ginormous detour to really grow Joseph's character along the way. Here we go. And the Lord was with Joseph, so he succeeded in everything he did, and he served in the home of his Egyptian master. Potiphar noticed this and realized that the Lord was with Joseph, giving him success in everything he did. This pleased Potiphar, so he soon made Joseph his personal attendant. He put him in charge of his entire household and everything he owned. Let's look him up. From the day Joseph was put in charge of his master's household and property, the Lord began to bless Potiphar's household for Joseph's sake. This is amazing. All his household affairs ran smoothly, his crops and his livestock flourished, so Potiphar gave Joseph complete administrative responsibility over everything that he owned. With Joseph there, I love this phrase so much, he didn't worry about a thing except what kind of food to eat. So I've got a first world problems here for Potiphar. But I really, really love this picture, you guys, of how when we acknowledge God's presence, and I put this on the screens because I wanted you to think about it. When we acknowledge God's presence on a detour, we can embrace how whatever it is that happens along the way has a purpose. It's purposeful beyond whatever the circumstances are on the detour. So it means there's more to the story, right? You know, the lemonade is starting to be made here. And even as a slave, you know, under Potiphar, Joseph, he learns to develop his character and his skills so he can assume later an even greater responsibility in his position as a ruler. And this is really important, and I found this to be so true in my life, is that often the hand of God comes through the hand of man. Isn't this true? Often the hand of God comes through the hand of man. Some of the greatest things that I've learned in my life have been working with people who've been difficult to work with, serving people who've been difficult to serve, loving people who've been difficult to love. And as we go on, we're going to see how God just continued to show Joseph his presence in the middle of the detour because he really wasn't ready to take him out of it at this point. And this is important because, and I want you to watch the screens on this, you know, sometimes, isn't this what we do? This is what I do. Sometimes I view God's presence based on his removal of the detour rather than his presence on the detour with me. Because my logic goes there first. And this is why we really need to learn to live in the now versus being focused on the next. It's so hard to do, isn't it? To live in the now versus being focused on the next. And you know how this goes. Oh, well, when I get that job, or when I get that raise, or when I meet that person, or when I get married, or when I have kids, or when my kids get in school, or when my kids graduate, or when I retire. It's so easy to live for the next rather than in the now, especially if it's on a detour. You know, Kent and I drive to Dallas frequently. My daughters live there. Does anybody drive to Dallas? It's a beatdown, I gotta tell you. And if there's a wreck, it's even worse. Because what happens is when there's a wreck heading down that freeway, it's like everything comes to a total parking lot standstill. So recently we were on a drive to Dallas and that happened. We're about halfway there. We weren't to Buc-ee's yet. But there's clearly a wreck. You can see the lights ahead. You know, everything has stopped. And you can see that what they're going to do for the detour is they're going to take everybody to the next exit ramp, and then you're going to go around the wreck. That's the detour plan. But it's taken a really long time, and we're all just sitting, and to the point, you know it's bad when people start getting out of their cars, and then they start making friends, you know, like they're talking, what do you think? I don't know, what about the truckers? See if you can tell you what's happening. Well, all of a sudden, we look down the road, and this guy, he's at the front of the line, but you can tell he's just totally lost it. And so he like peels off, like fast, like peels off, and he's heading for the green space, you know, to get over to the feeder lane earlier. And then it was like, yeah, this guy's going, we're gonna go. And then everybody starts peeling off like fast, except no one's getting to the feeder. You know why? There'd been a ginormous rain the week before. I kid you not, every single one of those cars was stuck because there's like a dip, you know, the dip is there. They're like down in the dip. Their wheels are spinning, the mud is flying over, and it was like a movie. Like I got my camera, I was videoing this. It was hilarious. I mean, I did feel bad for the people. And then all of a sudden you see lights coming, but they're not coming to the wreck, to where the detour is. They're tow trucks, and they're coming to tow everybody out of this. It's like a moneymaker. It's like huge for the tow trucks. So what's the moral? There's obviously a moral of the story. You know, the detour ended up not being near as painful, right, as trying to circumvent it or get around it or avoid the detour. It was not near as costly as trying to get around the detour. And like that's our natural pull, isn't it? To avoid the detour at all costs. But here's the thing, at least this is what I've learned in my life, that the transformation, you guys, typically happens on the detour. It doesn't happen on the straightaway. And when we try and take our own route, Tanya's route, apart from God, sometimes that process has actually not only taken longer for me, but it's actually set me back a little bit in doing that. And then the other thing I love about Joseph here, even though he has a long way to go, I don't really see him playing the blame game. You know, you know how it is sometimes when you're on a detour, you wanna blame that person or that thing or whatever happened. It is kind of a deflective thing, and you can get kind of defensive in the process. And then we focus on that thing or that person so that we don't really have to look inside. So we don't have to really embrace the transformation process that God wants to do in our lives. So I really love it how Joseph actually stayed in the pain, which is the harder thing to do, and he really let it transform his heart here. And we'll see the fruit of that in a minute. There's a verse in the book of Psalms that's outside of actually the storyline, and it describes what God was doing in Joseph's life. It says this in Psalm 105:19. Until the time came, I like that phrase, to fulfill these big old dreams, right, all the grand dreams, the Lord refined Joseph's character. It was that refining process that he was taking him through before he could take him to the next step. And I don't know about you, what's your response to a detour in your life? Is it to try and get around it, to go around it, to circumvent it, to maybe you're a power through? I don't know. I've seen people actually crash through the detour sign. They're like, I'm not doing that. I'm going there anyway. I saw someone do that last week in Missouri City. You know, are you on a detour right now? I remember a detour I went on. I was living in Aspen, Colorado in the mountains. And my company asked me to transfer to Las Vegas, Nevada. Now you think about that for just a minute. The mountains, Colorado, the desert, 117 in the summer. But they asked me to do it for 1 year, and so I did. I said I would go there for 1 year. I was single. I didn't know one ever-loving person in Las Vegas. I mean, it was super scary, you guys. It was really, really hard to do. But I have to tell you that during that detour, God did some work in my heart that I don't think ever would have happened had I stayed in my safe little mountain huddle there with all my good friends and all the safety of the familiar. He did some great work that prepared me for ministry things, for my marriage, so many great things along the way. So my encouragement to you is going to be to stay in the pain, to stay in the detour, and not try and circumvent it or go around it. And rather than focus on the detour itself, which is where our eyes automatically go, to stay there and let it do its work and make you even better. So I brought some questions. I put them up on the screens, and I'd love for you, when you go home tonight, to really think about these. I mean, the first one is, how can I stay in the now? So what would it look like for you to stay in the now versus the next? You know, some of you are sitting in a job right now where you're like, oh my gosh, how soon can I get to the next? This is painful. What's in it in the now for you? How's God refining you right now in the process of being there? So that's the second question. What is it that God might be refining in the now for you on the detour? And then the third is, what would it look like for you to trust him along the way? To trust him in the detour and stay in the pain. I think if you'll think about those things this week, when you come back next week, this story, you'll be able to really embrace what God's doing in the life of Joseph and hopefully embrace it personally. So would you pray with me? God, I thank you that in your plans for us, I thank you that there's just always more to the story. That our detours, that they're part of the story, but I'm just so grateful they're not the whole story. You know, I think about my time in Las Vegas, that it's so part of my story, but it certainly wasn't my whole story. That my move to Texas, it's certainly part of my story. I'm still here, but it wasn't my whole story. That my parents divorced, it is part of my story. But boy, it wasn't my whole story. And I thank you that you are the one who helps us and gives us the strength to keep our eyes on you rather than the detour. Help us do that even today when we go home, that when we lay our heads on our pillows tonight, that our eyes would go to you, that our focus would go to you rather than our detour. Help us to live in the now over the next. In Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Hey, thank you so much, Tanya. Clap for her. So amazing. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. If you're visiting after we dismiss, I'll be standing either by the door or right outside the door, depending on how cold I get. I'd love to meet you, though, if you're visiting. And then if you are visiting also, and maybe if you're not visiting and you're sitting in one of those comfy black plastic chairs, we would love for you to help us stack those chairs up, okay? Stacks of 16 to 18. If you can count that high, we'd love for you to help us. Thank you so much. Have a great week. We'll see you next time.